Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to another edition of Locked On Seminoles. What's up, everybody? It's your boy Drake here, and in just a few short moments, I'm going to send it all off over to myself, Max, and a very, very special guest that we have for today. Now, as y'all know, we do the Know Your Foe series where during the season we have opposing teams, hosts, sports media personalities come on the show and talk about their team. Now we're extending that to also doing it during the offseason. And we're starting off with the big one, our Labor Day weekend matchup with LSU Tigers. We're bringing on Miss Caroline Fenton of the Locked On LSU podcast and of ESPN. So she's a real Big J journal, folks. So we are actually credible now. We have a credible source when it comes to LSU football coming onto our show, talking about the Coach O era, Brian Kelly coming in. Who is their quarterback? Will it be Miles Brennan? Will it be the transfer Jane Daniels? And also, well, is that defensive line as scary as it seems? Spoiler alert, it pretty much is. But we had a great time sitting with Caroline, learning all about LSU football, and hopefully, Caroline, that we can go on your show and talk about how FSU is going to be bringing the smackdown when it comes to Labor Day weekend. But folks, I'm not going to hold you all back any further. As always, 5-star reviews, subscribe to Tippy Tippy Talk, like this video, and drop comments below to make sure we ask the questions that you want to hear on upcoming Know Your Foe segments. Now, without further ado, here's myself, Max, and Caroline of Locked On LSU. Gang, take it away.
Are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We're here with Caroline Fenton. She is of Locked On Tigers, but also with the Real Radio in Nashville. So you have a full-blown sports journalist here. She covered LSU while she was in college. Now she covers the Titans, the Predators, Vanderbilt, and every other sport that goes through Nashville. I think I actually named all of them, but irrelevant.
Except the Vols.
Except the Vols. That's right. How could I forget about the Vols? The NIL deals certainly haven't. Caroline, you are here today, though, to talk about the LSU Tigers. We've talked about them a lot. We've actually gotten a lot of your fans that have come on and said, hey, someone's got to have our back. So thank you for joining us today. And yeah, I'm excited. Let's start. Drake, where do we want to start this combo? How do we want to do this?
Let's start off with basically when LSU was last good. Let's talk about the Coach O era, because I remember you talking about pre-show that you were there kind of when you first started, and I think you were there up until I think the year before, you said, when they won the national championship. Kind of want to know, how was that entire process of Coach O coming, actually into the program as interim and then being promoted? And then what exactly led to sort of the downward spiral that we've seen the past few seasons?
Yeah, I mean, it truly was the best of times and the worst of times in the Coach O era. So Les Miles was fired in the middle of the 2016 season after we lost to Auburn. I mean, it was time for him to go. And so that was the big hot button topic, was who's going to take over for Les Miles. And there were so many names out there. And Coach O emerged as, like, he was the interim coach, and so many names out there that were interviewing for this position. And Coach O was named the full-time head coach. And I think that was a move that a lot of LSU fans were very, very confused about, because he was just like a defensive line coach. And he had such a terrible time, honestly. He had a tough time in his time as a head coach at Ole Miss. I think a lot of people are very confused. But I think that the element of him being a Louisiana guy, him going to LSU, didn't finish his career at LSU, but he did go to LSU for a short period of his college career. So it's kind of a fun little marriage there of, I truly believe that there is no state that loves its flagship university as much as Louisiana loves LSU. I know that sounds homer of me to say, but LSU truly is just woven into the fabric of the state of Louisiana. So there's a very special aspect there of a Louisiana born, bred, Louisiana accent guy kind of being the head coach at LSU. And there were, at the beginning, I mean, I remember there were several GoFundMes going around trying to fund Coach O's buyout, because his first year as head coach, we lost to Troy on homecoming, and it was so embarrassing. And then we come back the next year, and it's a 10-win season. We beat undefeated number 3 Georgia at the time. He was getting in all of these big time recruits. That year was Joe Burrow's first year, and so there was so much excitement in the air with Coach O, because he's one of the best recruiters in the country. And we were seeing results. I mean, LSU was nationally relevant after such a just melancholic time with Les Miles after he won the national championship. It was just, kind of monotonous that LSU was going to be nationally relevant. We weren't going to beat LSU. We weren't going to beat Alabama. The defense was always really good. The offense was just awful, and we could never find a quarterback. We found that in Joe Burrow, and we found that under the Coach O era. And then, of course, 2019 rolled around, and I stand by this. I've said it so many times. That 2019 season and that 2019 national championship had nothing to do with Coach O. And it had everything to do with the recruits, the players, the coaches, and just it being the perfect storm. That it was truly an island of misfit toys. You had Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was an undersized running back from Baton Rouge. You had Justin Jefferson, who was a 2-star recruit, a legacy, whose older brother was the quarterback of LSU whenever they played in the 2012 national championship against Alabama. You had Joe Burrow, who couldn't earn a starting spot at Ohio State. I mean, all of these star players in that 2019 team really came in with zero expectations. And then they made the best college football team, arguably, of all time. And it was because Coach O was such a good leader, was such a good recruiter, and knew when to step back, knew when to say, okay, Joe Brady, you're the passing game coordinator. You take over the offense. Dave Aranda, you're one of the highest paid coordinators in college football. You cover the defense. I'll just be here to be a face. And then you had, one of the best game managers, leaders, just dudes in Joe Burrow. And of course, 2 of the best wide receivers in the league now at the same time in Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. So it really was truly the perfect storm. And Coach O, hit his peak. And then after that, it was just like, of course, we lost so many players, so many coaches after that 2019 season. And then in 2020, we didn't expect it to really crash and burn like it did. It was Coach O took a step back, really, and, it struggled to put together a roster. Miles Brennan, the starting quarterback at the time, got hurt. And I think, if you want to focus in on Coach O, you could really tell that Coach O took his foot off the gas and he was enjoying just all of the glory that 2019 brought this team. He stopped organizing practices. It was so unorganized. It was roster mismanagement. It was just like, Coach O had his day in the sun, and he was going to enjoy that and not try to get back there. So, it was truly the best of times, worst of times. I wouldn't trade 2019 for anything. People always ask me, would you still want the national championship, even if you knew you were going to be bad for the following few years? And I would say every single time. 2019 was totally worth it, but it has been a shame to see kind of what this football program has turned into over the past couple of years. And I'm pumped to see what this new Brian Kelly era brings.
Yeah, we asked that question a lot on this show about Florida State, right? And the answer is always a resounding no. Yeah. You don't trade championships, but yeah. So I just kind of elaborating. I always found the Coach O hire so weird, because to me, he was Willie Taggart. He just got a quarterback sooner because of a transfer. Like this is going to sound rude, but I don't know how else to phrase it. To me, Coach O was like a fan that won a sweepstakes and got to coach. Like he never seemed like a serious coach. To me, I always thought y'all were just doing that to save a couple $1 million a year on his salary. That way it felt like there was always this unwritten, unspoken, we're just going to let this go till it gets bad. We're going to save money because he's not going to be expensive because no one else will hire him. And then we'll go get our big shiny, next guy, who I always thought would be Jimbo. But now we're seeing it's Brian Kelly. So I have 2 questions about Brian Kelly. One, I would like your insight on the coaching search, because I remember sending in a group text with Drake here, Dave, our other co-host. I was just like, this is hilarious. Like LSU looks so bad. They don't even have any smoke around any good coaches. Like they're going to promote another D-line coach. Like they don't. And then 3 days later,
rolled over.
You thought it would be Napier, actually, I think, when you thought about it.
Well, it was when they missed on Napier. I was like, I think they missed on Napier, and there's, and then 3 days later, ESPN alert, boom, you got Brian Kelly to leave Notre Dame, where he's been for a decade. He's played in 2 playoffs. He's played for a BCS national championship. He will go down up there with Newt Rockne as one of the greatest coaches to ever coach the Golden Domers. And now he's going to LSU for a king's ransom. So how are y'all able to keep that under wraps, A, and then just B, what's the opinion of him so far? I mean, how is he ingratiated, other than all accents aside, how is he ingratiating himself to the fan base, the boosters, the team? What are you hearing on that front?
Well, first and foremost, you say we missed on Billy Napier. I wouldn't say I would use the word missed.
It was a perceived miss at the time because we didn't know Brian Kelly was in the works.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't even think anyone any LSU fans viewed that as a miss. Billy Napier
Gotcha.
came from Louisiana Lafayette, which is, just a couple hours down the street from Baton Rouge. But that really is like LSU's little brother. So
Sure.
I would have viewed it like, Billy Napier's been able to do great things with that Louisiana Lafayette team. But I was like, LSU's better than that. They don't need to hire some guy who's been at LSU's little brother's school and promote him there. And I didn't really know how Billy Napier would be able to compete at the level of the SEC. Of course, he had Louisiana recruiting down, and that's a very important thing. That's, I would say, one of the highest priorities of LSU football, as we call it, boys from the boot, recruit the boot. It's keeping guys in Louisiana because you've seen so many great players. Devontae Smith, for example, is from Louisiana, went to Alabama. So that was one attractive part of Billy Napier. Yeah, worked out pretty well. But I didn't view Billy Napier as a win for LSU if they did choose to hire him. I saw that Florida hired him, and I was like, woo, good. That's going to be a win against Florida for the next few years. I admittedly thought that I wanted Dave Aranda, who's at Baylor now. He was the defensive coordinator at LSU. I think he's been able to turn Baylor around from whatever Matt Rule did to them in his last few years at Baylor. I mean, they were awful in Dave Aranda's first year. They were able to turn around just a couple of years later, win the Big 12 championship, and be a top 25 team at the end of the season. I love Dave Aranda. He is a very talented coach. He's a very no-nonsense coach. And I think that's kind of what this team needed, was a no-nonsense coach. And also a guy who knows LSU, who LSU fans know. He knows the recruiting area. He's in Texas. So, that's a big hotbed in recruiting for LSU as well. I wanted Aranda. When I heard the Brian Kelly hire, I was so confused. I was surprised.
You weren't the only one.
As were we.
I think everyone was very confused.
I mean, impressed. Don't get me wrong. Again, like I said, that was about as much of a stealing someone's lunch money as you can do in today's era. Like 100%. You went to proven success because it's not like if you had stolen, what's his name, Drake, or Caroline, help me, Matt Campbell from Iowa State, where it's like, yeah, he likes it there, but it's Iowa State. Like, you went and stole Notre Dame's coach. Like every little kid at some point, if it's for 2 minutes or 2 years, dreams like, man, I'd love to play on those gold helmets. Like and
he's been able to cultivate,
franchise.
and he's been able to cultivate like good QBs every single year. And he even made Jack Cohn look somewhat like a higher caliber QB this past season. So it's like with Brian Kelly, it's like that's kind of a home run hire aside from Lincoln Riley going to USC anyways.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, and Lincoln Riley was another name that was thrown around. I wasn't totally sold on Lincoln Riley. If they did ultimately hire Lincoln Riley, I think I would have been fine with it. I'm still skeptical on how much of a quarterback whisperer Lincoln Riley really is, because Spencer Rattler is supposed to be the next coming of college football, and he got benched and almost lost to Kansas. So I was a little skeptical of Lincoln Riley, really, truly, honestly, throughout this coaching search. I thought there's no way I can be happy, but there are a lot of ways that I can be mad. So with Brian Kelly, I was like, this is interesting. Okay. But our athletic director, Scott Woodward, is known for slam dunk cannonball hires. He hired Jimbo at Texas A&M. He hired Kim Mulkey, who's one of the most decorated women's basketball coaches in the country, to come to LSU. Jay Johnson, who found a ton of success at Arizona, hired him for our baseball team. So he's known for these slam dunk hires. So I knew it was going to be somebody big. Jimbo was a name that was thrown around.
That's who
Dabo was a name that was thrown around. And so Brian Kelly really was kind of a shock. I still don't really know how I feel about it. He has been called like the CEO of practice. And so I mentioned Dave Aranda, like they needed somebody that would really be kind of a hard ass. And that's what they did in Brian Kelly. I mean, you can see the differences in practice. Under Coach O, it was like drills happening everywhere, and practices started late and went 4 hours long, and didn't really know what exactly was going on. There was no structure within the program. Brian Kelly, in just a short period of time at LSU, it's been so structured. Everything is regimented, and he really is, the CEO, the organizer, and the hard ass that LSU needed to kind of get this program under control. LSU football could be facing a lot of NCAA allegations. That's something that I feel Brian Kelly, I have ultimate confidence that he's able to navigate those things because he has the experience in college football, and he has kind of that hammer that he's willing to bring down on this team. And it's exactly what LSU needed. How do I feel about him? We'll figure it out at the end of this season. We'll see how many wins he can get. We'll see how he can navigate the roster that he has. But I'm excited for it. Very skeptic, but I am optimistic nonetheless.
I will say he did make a good hire in Mike Denbrook being the offensive coordinator, QB's coach, who was actually formerly at University of Cincinnati, where he made Dave's not here, but Dave was not a big fan of Desmond Ridder, but he was able to make Desmond Ridder into a draftable QB. So, I mean, you've seen with the staff overall, like Brian Kelly also knows how to surround himself with a great supporting staff too as well, which is probably a big boom for you guys.
For sure. Oh, yeah. And having Mike Denbrock in here, and he's been with Brian Kelly for so long, their time at Notre Dame. And Mike Denbrock's been, able to really tailor a lot of quarterbacks. You mentioned Desmond Ridder. Jaden Daniels is a quarterback that really resembles Desmond Ridder a lot in their skill set. So I'm excited to see what they do.
So here's my question, though. I'm going to lay out a scenario and you let me know which way you think it's going to go. Because I think what you're saying about Brian Kelly, we said about Mike Norvell, not with the pedigree, but we needed someone that wasn't going to make practice a fun thing to go to, that wasn't going to, have it just be the, all right, offense, go work on whatever you were. Like, no one knew what Willie Taggart did at a Willie Taggart practice. And it was like kind of a laughing stock of the NCAA when you'd see videos from it. 'Cause you're like, that's not a college football practice. And what we saw with Mike Norvell was in year one, the really talented players that were like, we were thinking that Mike Norvell being a hard ass could get the best out of, said the right things in the offseason, but they all checked out because they were like, look, I'm a year from the league. I don't want to get yelled at. I don't care. How do you see that being an issue under Brian Kelly, or does it seem like everyone is legitimately bought in? Like, just what's kind of the vibe, not the vibe. What are you reading between the lines of what players are saying and how they're acting now? And yeah.
I think the really important thing that I've seen with Brian Kelly is his commitment to competition in the offseason. And I think that's how you keep all of your players bought in. Is we have 4 quarterbacks currently competing for the starting job, really 3, but 4. That keeps all of them dialed in. That keeps all of them really bought into the program. And he's constantly, he used the transfer portal a lot. He brought some players in from, equal caliber programs, brought in a couple transfers from Arkansas, but he also brought in a lot of players from maybe smaller schools, Louisiana Lafayette being one of them, another player coming in from Missouri, which isn't a small name school. But he's constantly bringing in new talent and creating more competition. And I don't see that being a problem of the checkout. But I don't know. That's hard because the landscape of college football is changing so much that are you there to play football? Are you there to make money? I don't care if you are. It's totally your right to make your money, to make your NIL deal. But I think that's going to be like a really difficult obstacle for every college football coach. But I think I see Brian Kelly with so much experience, and he's put so many players in the league that I don't think that buyout will necessarily be a problem, just with the culture that he's created around not just LSU football so far, but you've seen it at Notre Dame as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things with Bayou Brian that we like to call him down here, because basically the moment he stepped foot in Louisiana, he lost the Massachusetts accent and became, all about family and, all about gumbo and all that stuff. So
good old Southern boy, isn't he?
Good old Southern boy. And one of the big things he's been able to do is get the most out of his QBs, whether it be Tony Pike at University of Cincinnati. And now I know he said 3, so I'm assuming Walker Howard's not going to be a factor in for next year or 2.
He'll most likely redshirt this year. That's my assumption.
Okay. So then from Miles Brennan, Garrett Nussmeier, who's someone that we haven't talked about mostly, or Jane Daniels, who do you think basically right now is someone that we should be expecting to see for that September 5th Labor Day weekend game? Because to me, if Miles Brennan is healthy, that kid's a stud. That kid could be elite. But I do wonder if Jaden Daniels, having the similar skill set I said before with Mike Denbrock, would probably be the one that basically would be the kind of the curveball, so to speak. If he's able to, I guess, recapture the play style he had from 2 seasons ago. So who do you think is basically going to be the one under center actually for LSU that game?
Your guess is as good as mine. We have gotten close to 0 peek behind the curtain, and you hear good things about all 3 of them, all 4 of them, really, because Walker Howard's really coming along nicely. But each of them have such a different, interesting skill set and background. You look at Miles Brennan. This is his 6th year in college, but he hasn't started and played a full season ever. Because the 2 years that he started in 2020 and 2021, he got injured. Well, he didn't start in 2021. He got injured before the season, but he got injured in the middle of the 2020 season. And then Max Johnson came in, and Max Johnson started last year, who now transferred to Texas A&M because he got injured. So he's been there for 6 years, but also hasn't started a crazy number of games. He also hasn't played a full season of football ever throughout his time in college.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. I look at Jaden Daniels, and he's started 28 games, I believe, at Arizona State. He's been their bona fide starter his entire career. And then you look at Garrett Nussmeier, who really is kind of a long shot. He was a redshirt last year. He doesn't have a lot of starting experience either, but he's been looking really good in practice, and he's created a lot more buzz than I really expected, that he really is, albeit a long shot, a legitimate contender for the starting job. I really do think it's going to come down to either Miles Brennan or Jaden Daniels. But I think, and this is just my opinion, I think it's going to be Jaden Daniels because he has the most starting experience. Of course, Miles Brennan's been in this program longer. He's been around. Jaden Daniels has the most starting experience. And also, he fits the style that Mike Denbrock has had so much success with Desmond Ridder. I mean, Desmond Ridder is very much so a dual threat. Jaden Daniels is a dual threat. And if you look at his career at Arizona State, his freshman year, he balled out.
Oh, he was a monster.
He was a monster because he had weapons to throw to. In the following 2 seasons, it's hard to look at anything in 2020 and take too much away from it. But this past season, it wasn't a great season because he didn't have anyone to throw to. The Arizona State program was in disarray. I think if Jaden Daniels gets in this offense, being such a run threat and also having weapons to throw to and having an offensive line that can protect him, I think that he is my most logical, option to start. But also, I have no idea. I don't think anyone has any idea.
Yeah, I'm gonna say 2 contradictory things, because I don't know how I feel. Jaden Daniels, when I heard he was going to LSU, made no sense. Brian Kelly with a running quarterback, that's like giving me a Ferrari. I'd probably be able to figure out how to drive it down the street, but it's not what I'm used to. It's just a totally different
He's a
setup
Beamer
than my
guy, so
sedan,
classic
right?
Flex Max.
Well, it's a 4-door sedan that's automatic. It's a whole different ballgame. And then I guess the other thing I would say is almost pushing back on Jaden Daniels, or defending Jaden Daniels a bit, right? Last year, 10 touchdowns to 10 picks. Take away the picks, he had a great season. I mean, 2,300 yards, 65% completion. They added 700 on the ground. So it's not like, again, 10 interceptions to 10 touchdowns isn't great. But as Jameis Winston fans, we know sometimes you got to look beyond just the interceptions, right? Like he had, if you could drop that to 10-5 even, that's a phenomenal season at quarterback. So he is a very interesting prospect in what he could be. It's just, is Brian Kelly the guy to get it out of him? I think that's where I almost see this as like one of those celebrity marriages. It feels like Pete Davidson and Kim Kardashian. It's like, you're both probably good at what you do. I just together don't know if that's going to be a good product.
That's a really good call, Max.
So I'm interested to see that. And then that's why I lean towards Miles Brennan, because he just is very much that prototypical LSU quarterback, right? LSU, it's the University of OBJ. You all have always had great receivers, but it feels like you have sometimes, but you rarely have a great running back and great tight ends and great receivers. There's always kind of one of those deficiencies. The wide receivers
never a great quarterback, except for that one time we did.
So it's like, I don't know, Miles Brennan just feels more LSU. And I know it's such a stupid thing to judge your starting quarterback on, but I think for me, that's just kind of where I stand on it. But I want to pivot to y'all's D-line because, our comments have blown up about it. We have historically had a terrible offensive line. This year, we brought in seven high school offensive linemen. 2 of them are 4-stars. Hopefully they don't have to play. We've also added 4 transfers, I believe, and we're in a position where all 5 of our starters against LSU will likely be transfers who have at least 2 years each of D1 FBS starting experience. But y'all's D-line is freakish, as always. So I don't do it justice, even though your fans have complimented me on getting better. Can you talk about your D-line for a couple minutes, just who y'all have, what we should expect to see, and what they do to opposing offensive lines?
We'll ask, does your quarterback have life insurance?
Because the way he played last year, he probably should have bought some.
That should be his next NIL deal, to be honest with you.
I mean,
Lords of London NIL deal.
This is the defensive line. Is if you ask like any LSU fan what they are most secure in this LSU team, I would say a majority of LSU fans would say this defensive line. Quarterback's up in the air. The offensive line is a question mark. The running back room is deep. The wide receiver room is deep. But the defensive line really, truly is a force to be reckoned with new talent, young talent, and talent that's been around before and is proven. BJ Ojulari is a pass rusher. BJ Ojulari, he's nuts. He is insane. And then you look at Mason Smith, who's a younger guy who last year got some opportunity, but I really do think that this year is going to be the year that he pops off. And with, that pairing with BJ Ojulari, a veteran player, kind of leading the pack, and then Mason Smith being able to come in, learn from him with a year underneath his belt, I think is going to be huge. Not on the defensive line, but a linebacker, a pass rushing linebacker, a number one linebacker prospect in the country, and Harold Perkins, a kid from Texas who just committed to LSU. I don't know what he can be in his freshman year. I don't know how quickly he can adjust to college ball, but I mean, he was a beast in high school. And I do think that if he can get himself acclimated, he's also going to be a force in this defense. It's going to be able to, put a lot of pressure on the quarterback. And another one on the D line is Mekhi Wingo. That also is kind of a question mark to me. He's a sophomore coming in from Mizzou, a transfer from Mizzou. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't watch much Missouri football.
No one does.
You really shouldn't.
And that was a trash defense last year, like absolutely atrocious. But he was the one shining star in that defense that really made Missouri fans feel good about the defense. And then he transferred to LSU, so happy for me. But this defensive line is big. And we saw this in the spring game also. The offense in the first half was so rattled because that defensive line, the defense as a whole, the pass rushers just came out so hungry. It's the spring game. How much can you really take out of it? But even at that point in April, I mean, they looked poised, ready to go, hungry, and just honestly just vicious. So you saying that the offensive line isn't really your strongest suit, I do think that's where the game is going to be played, is in the trenches.
Well, that just changed my entire prediction for a week 2 game. Just hearing all about that. But no, I mean, that was one of the biggest things. And then also, I mean, we can go to the second level for the defense. And you did lose, unfortunately, Derek Stingley Jr., who was someone that I personally believe could have been drafted after his freshman year, like Maurice Claret style.
So many times. I totally agree with you.
Yeah,
he looks like a grown man his freshman year.
And he played like it, dude. He knew everything he needs to do. Like, it looked like a 10-year vet out there. So I kind of want to know, how are you, since you guys claim to be, the fake DBU, because FSU is the real DBU, how are we able to, replenish the cover back there?
We have this discussion every year. Texas wants to be DBU.
Florida State wants to be DBU.
Everyone wants to be DBU. LSU is DBU.
There's 3 schools that have claim to it. I will go on the record now. There's 3 schools that could claim it. It's us, it's LSU, and it's Ohio State. Those are 3 schools, in my opinion. Maybe Michigan pre-2005. Pre-2005, we were talking 80 to 2005. That 25 years, Michigan had a strong argument, but they're kind of gone now. I mean, they do have the only defensive back to win a Heisman. So give them that. But for the modern era, there's 3 teams, in my opinion, that have a claim to it. I want to put that to bed right now. Not Texas. I don't know where that comes from.
All right. So as DBUs, speaking to each other right now, I know you still have Jay Ward, who is someone that actually FSU tried to recruit a few years ago. He's their starting safety. But I think you also have new stars in Jarek Bernard-Converse, Mekhi Gardner, and Greg Brooks Jr. So how are you able to, you can't replicate Derek Stingley Jr. The kid was a monster. So what should we be expecting with these defensive backs? Because FSU wide receivers, we have a lot of new faces. Like, what are your strong suits and what are your weak suits?
I think with the corners, there are so many coming in from transfers. You mentioned it, Jarek Bernard-Converse, Greg Brooks. There's so many. The core of this defensive back group is all made up of transfers. So that's honestly, that's a question that I have as well, is how can this defensive back group work together, coming from all different systems, coming from all different areas and all different ages as well. I think my biggest thing, the only thing that's making me feel secure about this defensive back group, just because I don't know how they're going to look together, I don't know how it's going to work together, is I don't know how much work the defensive backs are really going to have to do because of this defensive front. Of course, they're going to have to put in some work, but I think that's going to be the biggest point of emphasis in this LSU defense, is get to the quarterback, sack the quarterback, put pressure on the quarterback. And that makes this defensive back group's job so much easier. And what eases my fears about, kids coming in from Arkansas, ULL, Oklahoma State, Jarek Bernard-Converse, and just not knowing what this group looks like, is knowing that the guys up front, if they can do their job, then the defensive backs are going to be sitting pretty.
So here's the thing. So I think this is the best position group to talk about it with, because defensive line last year was phenomenal. You guys had 36 sacks, which puts you, I think, at 14th, 15th in the nation. But when I look at your passing game or your passing defense, right, you were 83rd in the nation in defensive passing success rate and 86th in the nation in explosiveness allowed. It was not for lack of talent. And, I asked you pre-show, but to ask it a little more gently on the air, how much of this season, not just the game, but this season is going to come down to if the players decide to show up? Because we see turnover in our roster and it's addition by subtraction. We had so many cancerous players. We had bad players getting replaced by better players, but that's not the case. Y'all lost 11 guys to the NFL last year in just the draft. And I don't know how many went into free agency. So you're not necessarily getting quote unquote better players. You're just hopefully getting players that try harder. So just how frustrating is that to try to predict a team when it's like, there's no question the talent's there, but last year you saw the talent was there and you got 6 wins.
It was so frustrating. And that was the biggest, I guess, qualm from the LSU fan base to the Coach O regime is how in the world can you have one of the top recruiting classes and have some of the most talent in the country and mismanage it so horribly? Like, I think that is a criminal offense, what that Coach O coaching staff did to this team last year. And I don't think it was for lack of effort. And if it was, that wasn't produced by the team, that wasn't manufactured by the players themselves. I think it was a distrust in the coaching staff. You've heard all the stories about Coach O bringing his girlfriends to practice. Yeah. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that the players just were so fed up with the coaching staff, were so fed up with Coach O. So if there was a lack of effort there, I think it was just because there was no team culture. There was no team camaraderie. There was really nothing to play for. They didn't feel the same spirit or the same just vibe in the air that they have in the past. I didn't feel it. Like I watched LSU football the past 2 years, but this doesn't look like LSU football. This doesn't look like, what the expectation for LSU is. Bo Pelini, the defensive coordinator in 2020.
I was just about to bring that up.
Bo Pelini. Like, that is public enemy number one.
He's a real person, by the way.
Yeah, Max for the longest time thought he was a fake person.
Let's not name names, but if anyone listening thought that Faux Pelini was just a really funny Twitter account and didn't realize it was based on a real guy's name, it is. Turns out Faux Pelini.
Bo Pelini, contrary to popular belief,
he's a real person.
Real.
Unfortunately.
Sometimes I wish maybe he wasn't.
Not a real defensive coordinator.
Not a real defensive coordinator. No. Well, he spent time at LSU. He, coached the defense at LSU prior to his tenure at Nebraska, whatever it might be, but he's been at LSU before. And that was kind of Coach O's way, bringing him in 2020, after all of those coaches left. David Aranda left, a bunch of defensive coaches left, so many defensive players leaving. I think that was maybe Coach O's way of saying, okay, I'm bringing in almost like a constant, like we're losing so much that we know, I'll bring something back in that we know, just to kind of bring in a little bit of familiarity. But it was like, he should be arrested with how bad he managed that defense. It was so bad. It's so bad. So, naming the stats of the defense, it was not because of a lack of talent. I think it was just the management of the coaching staff, the management of the team, the play calls, all of the above. There was just no buy-in from the players. And I don't credit the players for that. I think that's all on the shoulders of Coach O and this coaching staff.
Yeah, look, it's parenting or coaching or being a boss, whatever you do in your daily life 101, right? Like, people around you, or especially subordinates, will only take things as seriously as you do. So it's really hard to get yelled at for not running sprints hard and take that seriously by a guy who there was just a tweet about catcalling 20-year-old women outside of a gas station, right? Like, there's just that and that's how you create culture. It's not what you say when you're in front of them, it's how do you act
when you're not being seen by them.
Right. Like, you think about.
Don't get me wrong. Like, appreciate Coach O. He brought a championship to LSU. Thanks for what you do, but don't let the door hit you on the way out, is kind of how I feel about Coach O.
Go Tigers. But I like how you mentioned talent. This kind of probably be a great way to like wrap up the football side of things, where basically we talked pre-show about probably the best wide receiver in the game right now, and that's Kayshon Boutte. And we can, I know you spend a little time on, your homeboy, but I do want to ask about the other weapons on the offense, whether it be John Emery and Noah Kane in the backfield. You also got Malik Neighbors as one of your wide receivers. I think Jack Besh is someone that you mentioned before too as well. So who should we be hearing? Whose name should we be not afraid of, but keep an eye out for actually when the game does kick off Labor Day weekend?
Jack Besh. I mean, you named a
That's
list
not his
of
real name,
very,
is it?
very Jack Besh. Yeah.
Sweet name. Of course he's a football player. Why wouldn't
Louisiana.
he?
I mean,
That's your
Look
name.
at these
If that's
names, man.
your
Keishawn
name, if that's your name,
Butte,
yeah.
Noah Kane.
Yeah.
Like, these are
Okay.
great.
Athlete
like,
names
football
in
names.
Louisiana are awesome. Great football names. Like Lloyd Cushenberry was a great one. He was our
Tyrann
center in
Mathieu.
2019. Tyrann Mathieu,
I'd have
great one.
expected him
Like,
to
all
play
the
for
Cajun
Denver.
names. Yeah, they're great. Good one.
Nice.
But yeah, Jack Besh. I mean, you named so many very talented offensive players, and they're all going to be able to contribute to this offense in so many ways, depending on who the quarterback is. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, but I think Jack Besh is a player that when Keishawn Butte got hurt, Jack Besh emerged as Max Johnson's number one target, his favorite target. And he was a freshman tight end that really ended up just lighting up the game. So he's now a converted wide receiver. And I think the way, too, that you've seen Mike Denbrock and Brian Kelly use tight ends in the past, I think you're kind of going to see like a very creative way that Jack Besh is used. So that's going to be one player that he's just like, once he puts those pads on, once he gets on the field, once it's game time, I mean, he turns into a different person. He just turns into an absolute animal. He is fast. He is a ball hawk. He is a wonderful complement to Keishawn Butte. Absolutely. I mean, those are two wide receivers that I think could be one of the best duos in the nation.
And it helps out. You got Miles Frazier too from FIU to guard him too, because basically your offensive line need a little bit of help up in the front.
Yeah, the offensive line has a lot of question marks. Will Campbell is a name. He's a true freshman coming in. I believe he's the favorite to play left tackle. He played left tackle in the majority of the spring game. That's kind of a concern for me because that's the most important position on the offensive line. You're protecting the quarterback's blind side. So can you do that at the college level coming in your first year as a true freshman? And, you don't have the privilege of playing, East Carolina Upstate Tech University game one, like you're playing Florida State. So that's kind of a concern for me. He's a 5-star recruit coming in. He was, great in high school. He was a really, really talented player and a lot of really great signs so far in the offseason. But that is a question mark of mine on the offensive line is, can this true freshman come in and play left tackle? I don't know. If anyone can do it, it is Will Campbell, but there are a lot of question marks on offensive line.
And I think that'll be one of the more interesting matchups to watch, right? We know y'all have an elite defensive line, and we have a lot of question marks at offensive line. But again, they're transfers. They all could be good. Same thing on the other side, right? Our strongest unit, some of it's DB, but it really is our defensive line. And I think the biggest question mark for me on y'all's offensive line is the coaching decision. I mean, he was one of, I think, 2 coaches retained from the Coach O era was your offensive line coach. And the offensive line was, it's again, I don't want to sound rude because I'm not going to throw stones in a glass house, but was pedestrian last year, right? Every metric that you can possibly look at for O-line, which are all kind of tough, they're in like the bottom third or the bottom quartile of the nation. And yet that's the one coach that stays. So what do you think it is about him that made Brian Kelly decide to retain him? Do you expect to see a big jump in the offensive line's performance this year because of him specifically, or just because of the new talent, or just help me make sense of that being the one retention despite the unit's performance?
Well, how the offensive line will perform this year, I think really depends on who's named quarterback. If Jaden Daniels is the quarterback, he has the ability to roll out and run if the offensive line isn't doing their job of protecting him. If you go with Miles Brennan, yes, he also is a mobile quarterback, but he's not as quick and he's not as talented of a runner as Jaden Daniels is. Good quarterbacks make their offensive line look really good. Like LSU won the award for the best offensive line in the country with Joe Burrow as their quarterback. And they did have a couple players come back after that year. And then you saw those numbers drop and you saw that offensive line ranking drop. And it's because, there was a freshman quarterback out there that just wasn't as good and wasn't as talented, didn't have as much of a control of the game as Joe Burrow had. So I do think it really depends on the quarterback. Why did they decide to retain the offensive line coach? There was a lot of coaching decisions and coaching hires made for recruiting. I think I have to give kudos to Brian Kelly for understanding his limitations, that recruiting, not just in the state of Louisiana, but in the Southeast as a whole, is a different beast as it is to recruit, in Boston, at Notre Dame, in the Midwest. It's a different beast. And recruiting in Louisiana is just different, period.
Right.
Yeah.
So it could have been a recruiting angle, or it could have been he came in and he just, saw just mutual understanding of what they wanted to do with the offensive line. I don't look too far into the offensive line coaching decision to retain them because not a lot of coaches were retained. So I think it's something either recruiting or just, a mutual understanding of what they want this offense to be and how they want to develop some of the young guys on this offensive line, because they lost almost every single member of that offensive line that they had last year and prior. So it's a developing offensive line. So
quick point, because I suck at research. He actually did leave after the article I read. When I put together my show notes, I was double checking his name.
I should know that.
No, you wouldn't. No, he literally left like a month ago. So our bad. Anyway, Drake, you can cut that part out. Sorry, so Drake will tell you this. I'm actually pretty good at research, but when I go fast, I had that in my notes. And oh shit, wait.
No, that's
double
that's
checking.
staying in. That's staying in.
Double check if Brad Davis is the coach, because now I'm thinking James Gregg, the guy from 2020, might be at San Fran. So you mentioned the quarterback making the offensive line better, and I'm sharing this in real time. This is not because I'm smart, but looking at the database I keep, would y'all believe that Arizona State was the best team in the country last year when it came to offensive line yards, which is one of the primary metrics to measure how much room the offensive line creates for rushing? I had no idea. Now I get how their quarterback ran for 700 yards. But yeah, so that's interesting. I'm going to go back and watch the film, because I'd be curious how much of that was Arizona State of all teams had a great offensive line, and how much of it was when you have that guy under center who can run.
Able to roll out. Yeah, he's going to avoid a lot of sacks because he can just move. And Brad Davis, he was the interim head coach after Coach O left last year. Players love him, absolutely adore him. So that's why.
Cool. Yeah. He's still there. I was right, and then I was wrong, and I'm right again. So it was the other guy, Greg, that went to the 49ers.
Greg.
Anyway,
not cutting
Brad
that
Davis
out.
was served as the first black head coach at LSU. So a lot of history there. Players just absolutely adore Brad Davis. I love Brad Davis. He's a great guy.
All right, Drake, I think we have learned a decent bit about LSU. If nothing else, we have heard a lot about the talent of LSU, but it kind of sucks, man. It's like our best chance is like their team just won't show up. But we've seen 2 years of that now, so a man can dream.
And also, Brian Kelly did not look prepared in his first game last year when Notre Dame came down to Doak. So hopefully, we catch y'all early. And listen, if the best chance to actually play against y'all is your first game under a new system, under a new head coach, albeit it'll be in Louisiana, probably the best chance for us is basically saying, hey, catch you sleeping just a little bit, because we're bound to steal one game some sort of time, because it needs to happen after the past 5 years.
I do want to ask y'all,
sure,
because I know when we played Clemson in the national championship in New Orleans, there were so many salty Clemson fans. Of course, that's a national championship, but do y'all view this game in New Orleans as being almost like an unfair advantage? Or
absolutely,
just rolling your eyes at
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's
this
unfair.
Will be like a home game.
You just said the entire fabric of the state is around the school.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, it's gonna be absolutely. It's always bonkers in New Orleans, but it's gonna be bonkers times 10.
Yeah, to me, what they did was they basically gave y'all a home game, but enough hotel rooms so people could actually show up for an expensive game.
It's a home game, but like with Bourbon Street.
Yeah, look, I mean, and we talked about this on our show, right?
I'll be there, so
I won't. I know myself better than that, and I don't need Bourbon Street in my life anymore. Those days are gone. But yeah, I mean, it's like a home adjacent game, and then I think we play y'all where in Tampa or Jacksonville or something.
Orlando.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
which is a game.
So like a home game, but with Disney.
No, like a game no one wants to go to. I mean, like that. So
that's the best way to put it.
Picture of the state of Florida. It would be the equivalent of y'all playing in Austin, Texas, distance wise. So it's not close. I mean, it's equidistant, right? Like so Florida State. This is a fun fact. We have, by some measure that people have made up, one of the most dispersed fan bases in the Power Five, right? There's nothing near Tallahassee, and no one stays. Like it's not like. And forgive me if I'm generalizing, but it's not like you can go right over to New Orleans and work, which is 45 minutes or whatever from campus. Like if you want a job after school, your closest option is Jacksonville, which is 3 hours away. Tampa's 4.5, Orlando's 4, Atlanta's 5 to 6, depending on where in Atlanta you live. So my point is everyone's got to take a plane to Orlando except for the Tampa folks. So whether it's a flight from Baton Rouge or a flight from New Orleans or a flight from Atlanta, it's kind of
flight's a flight.
6 one half dozen the other. Yeah. Right. So I do think it's a little unfair, but ultimately, like, I don't know.
You probably have more UF fans in Orlando than anything. That's what, like an hour to Gainesville?
Yeah.
The UF fans are actually a lot more in the Orlando area. I think Tallahassee is strictly the only like strong fan base that has FSU fans. Because even down here in South Florida, too, like where I'm from, it's like 60 Miami and 40 UF down here, anyways, too.
Okay.
Yeah. No, so it'll be good though. So Caroline, we appreciate you coming on our show. Hopefully we can do this again as the game gets closer, since we'll have a tune-up game and we'll know what we have, and y'all still be trying to figure out who your starting quarterback is. So really exciting times for all around. Yeah, I sucked at that. Anyway, folks, y'all know me. I'm not always the best at this. Caroline, real quick, I know I mentioned radio at the beginning, but I forgot the station name. Please tell the people, especially the LSU fans here, where they can find your stuff. Tell them about Locked On Tigers and all that good stuff.
Yes, you can listen to me. I'm on national radio, ESPN 1025 The Game. You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Facebook Live. We also have an app, the Game Nashville app, but you can find Locked On LSU wherever your preferred podcast platform is, Spotify, Amazon Music, iTunes, whatever it is, and also Locked On LSU on YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at Caroline Fenton 1.
Cool. Thanks, Caroline. We appreciate having you. Everyone,
adios.
Thanks for stopping by. I'm Max. That was Drake. That was Caroline. And this was Locked On Seminoles.
Take care, everybody. Go Noles.